IT problems have been going on, but we're back. We're now on item 10.5, the Health and Wellbeing Report. Are there any questions on item 10.5? Councillor Radley.
Thank you, Convener. It's on page 320, and I really do welcome this report. I think it's a really excellent insight into sort of the well-being of our young people. But I am concerned to see the rise, or although it is very small, the rise in use of lifestyle drugs. I'm thinking specifically around weight loss drugs, and given our importance that we've put on healthy weight, I'm very concerned that actually our messaging might be causing some of this rise, and I just want to seek reassurance that we will never be promoting weight loss drugs. We will be promoting a healthy weight, not stigmatizing our students, not making them feel that they're not. Anyway, I just want to make sure that our messaging, specifically around the healthy weight and all that we're doing around that, is focused more on exercise, on healthy eating, and not on weight loss drugs, because I think it's a rising issue within our society, and I'm really concerned about it.
Thanks very much. The director will help.
Through you, Convener, and say it's a pity that Nikki, who led on the healthy weight report, isn't still around, because she actually does an awful lot of work with our ADP. I can give that cast iron guarantee. Absolutely, we would not be advocating for the use of weight loss drugs, etc.
Good, glad to hear that. Councillor Allah.
Yes, Kevin, I'll go back to it because on the 29th of April, the committee resolved the use of appropriate wording. And I think appropriate wording, language is an important factor as well, after what Councillor Ridley said, and specifically the use of the word obesity. We've got 10 times the word obesity used in our paper today, altogether, in all our papers today. There is even reference to obesogenic environment. I do think that our language is important. It's important that we preach, we do what we preach. So I would love that to be implemented.
Through you, Convener, noted, I think some of the references are key lifts from the national documentation. Obviously, we're working very, very closely with colleagues in public health, and they're being steered by the national documentation, which is evidence-based, but absolutely take your point.
Vice Convener?
It's actually a follow-up on that vein. Can we get some narrative on that vein of what work's being done to reduce stigma for children and young people around healthy living, weight, etc., or to flip that, maybe just positive promotion of healthy living? Does that make sense?
We've not touched it within this report. I mean, it probably is one, actually, Councillor Many, I'd have to go out and speak to schools to get an up-to-date position. From memory, we've not referenced this in the health and wellbeing update, but I'm happy to ask schools, or maybe Ms. Powell, can you come in?
Yeah, I mean, I put the microphone too close, sorry. In regards to the report, we talk about the importance of eating breakfast, and we survey kind of intake of kind of sort of having enough nutrition. And I think that's the focus, isn't it, in terms of actually, are you getting healthy meals? Is there someone at home able to feed you? And, the use of energy drinks and those kind of things we survey through this. We're still not seeing the increase we'd like in regards to breakfast, particularly when children and young people are going off to school. In terms of enough young people having that, we know the importance of having regular meals and healthy regular meals, and wanting to promote that in children and young people as they grow up, so they develop those healthy habits as adults as well. And so work sort of continues in that vein, alongside the work around the free school meals and the meals in sort of available in school. And obviously there's links in terms of sort of health and promoting good sleep, and then the kind of the parameters and the promotion of the best way to use social media, the best way to use personal devices in terms of trying not to use your device at night. Those kind of things will come under the parameter of this report and are quite joined up in the promotion of health as a construct rather than the promotion of a particular, image or ideal. And so sort of as part of the PSE curriculum across our learners, particularly at secondary, that these things are focused upon because it's mainly secondary schools we're surveying. It's only, the upper stages of primary, but there continues to be these health promotions. And so, they would respect the points from the other councillors in regards to language, but are also quite unified in trying to promote health as a construct rather than sort of an outcome, as it were.
Yeah, I think that's really, oh, sorry, follow up if that's okay. Yeah, I think that's really helpful for us to tease out in committee because it does all feed in again to a young person's sense of self and their self-image and body image, etc., etc. So I think, as we've discussed before, a lot of the things that we do in committee all intertwine. So I think that's important to understand in committee as well. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fairful.
Thank you, convener. And yeah, I think this report is really interesting and very informative. So thank you to those responsible. I have got ongoing concerns about the with regards to body image, self-confidence of our young people and what's being reported. While there are some improvements, it is still quite low, and action is clearly being taken. But this is just I'm aware that this is just such a vital time in our young people's lives, and particularly for females and those in less affluent groups reporting higher variations of these feelings, and how we've identified that online social media and the information that they're being given is probably affecting that. I just wanted a little bit of narrative on how we're particularly targeting the social media aspect and its direct correlation to low feelings of self-worth and self-belief, if possible.
Thank you. Are we targeting? Ms. Powell? Yep, thank you.
Through you, convener. Thank you for the question, councillor. It's a really tricky thing because there's still not actual direct research that proves that, I guess, the harm that we all feel social media is causing. There's quite a lot of research happening through the University of Glasgow currently, and they've come down quite measured in saying the kind of outcomes of that in terms of the support that social media can provide to children and young people, particularly marginalised groups, in terms of giving a sense of identity and community for these groups that perhaps aren't able to access it within their actual home community, across Scotland. So they're kind of quite tempered in their kind of initial findings from the research. They are suggesting that access to social media is delayed in terms of, primary school children shouldn't really be accessing social media. That aligns with the age limits that are actually in place by those companies. Whether they're being upheld is a different matter. So within ourselves and within the local authority, what we have in place are things like the Stronger Family series, where we're promoting I guess, support for families and how they consider the complex range of issues around social media use. There are, through the PSE curriculums, sort of, I guess, discussion and sort of thinking points for the children and young people about how they engage with social media, how they interact with this kind of content, to, I guess, try and bring in kind of critical thinking around what you see and what you don't see in social media, and the use of filters and the use of what's behind the image that you're seeing, all those kind of things. And I think there's quite a strong link between actual sort of critical thinking of learners. And so the more we can actually bring that kind of critical thinking into the curriculum, the better, because they can apply it to a wider range of life experiences, which is really important, isn't it? So we kind of need to promote that. There's also wider, and continue to promote that. There's also wider themes in that there's a link between, you know, self-esteem and self-efficacy and other sort of health outcomes, not just confidence in your appearance. There's, you know, your ability in terms of to try new things, your ability to have faith in yourself during exam performance. All those things are very, very interlinked, but there's also a link with behaviour, which is interesting because that was another one of our big topics earlier. And there's a real kind of correlation, we can't say a causation there, in terms of you know, more incidents come from children with low self-esteem, low confidence, and so we can see that it has an impact across a variety of areas. So I think we're not just trying to tackle it in one area such as appearance, we're trying to address it across the mental health of learners so that we can have better outcomes in all these key aspects of their lives. But the curriculum is a really important part of that and will continue to be promoted as such, so that those critical thinking, the challenge, you know, those skills that maybe feel a little bit like we're losing as a society. You know, schools have a really important part to play in ensuring that we're getting our young people to think about those things. And I was in supporting an incident that happened in one of our secondary schools prior to the last committee, and some of the questions and thoughts coming from those young people were really appropriate and really showed the level of critical thinking they were engaging with, and the staff were really supporting them with that in terms of seeing things from more than one side, different perspectives, and so that's the kind of content we're looking to see our certainly our secondary schools promote in terms of that criticality, and, you know, challenging of sources, thinking of things from different perspectives. But I also know that our primary colleagues are, you know, introducing in the appropriate early ways as well. So for me, I know it sounds like I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but I think these things are really interlinked, and that we can't just focus on one kind of slice of life, because it's all very interconnected. But we continue with programmes for parents in relation to social media and, you know, health in the home, as it were, and we continue with the PSE curriculum, but it's also about the wider curriculum we offer as well, and the importance of putting those kind of thinking skills into that for our learners.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. It's excellent, and yeah, I completely agree that I very much put it into social media being the only aspect in my question, but I completely agree that it's a very complex and outreaching. You know, there's lots of different factors involved, but I'm reassured that we're tackling that well. I don't think we can underestimate our young people either. They are seeing, they are able to critique, they are seeing what social media is doing, they are listening to what they're being told, and they're kind of learning from the lessons that we've kind of already been going through. I just also wanted, I was quite interested about the fact about those who were going through kind of puberty and going into high school during the COVID kind of pandemic, and the fact that they weren't able to integrate in the same way. Are we still kind of looking at these learners, and are they continuing to progress?
Thank you, Ms. Powell.
Through you, convener. Thank you again for the question. We are in terms of this cohort, for some reason, which we kind of can understand based on teenage brain development, girls were more impacted than boys in that cohort. And we've, as you can see from the kind of section within the report, we've been able to show progress across most of these areas. However, feeling pressured by schoolwork is something that's across kind of all the cohorts, so still being something that we're looking to address, and is likely because of the kind of focus on high standards and high attainment across all our schools as part of the inspection processes. So we've got to kind of view it with that lens. But what we're seeing is that we obviously will continue to get data on that year group. So the next report, they'd be S6. So again, we'd continue to consider them against our others. But what we can see is for many of the items, they've come back in with the normal range of their sort of peer groups. And in some of them, we can see are actually reporting better than the previous S5 cohorts. And so we've seen a lot of improvement for that group, which is thanks to the hard work and kind of bespoke interventions that our secondary schools have been putting in place for them, in terms of just trying to think about these learners in a different way, and think about what their needs are. And I guess the work of schools to try and really have that whole school approach to mental health and well-being. So those things will continue. And I guess the kind of having the trend data allows us to see if other trends are emerging. I think that we can't just pretend that very strange period of time never happened. Do you know what I mean? And we're very aware, I think, as a society about the impact it's had on stress levels generally, the kind of overwhelm, whether it's in education, whether it's in the wider communities, the kind of financial pressures people, all these various kind of after effects we're still seeing in terms of our kind of community data, our health data. It's so widespread. So we can't say that the impact of that has left them, because I think it will be there, and we don't know what other impact we might see in the boys within that community as well, that they're not showing now. So it's about that kind of, our kind of remit in terms of education committee sort of finishes when they leave school, but the work of the wider council continues in terms of how we support these generations to stay connected and stay concerned and be supported by one another, and all those kind of things that are important for sort of mental health outcomes that go beyond the sort of scope of this committee, because obviously they've got one more year of formal education left. Some of them might have left already this year, because the timetable has just changed over in terms of the exam diet has finished for S5 and S6, and the new years have started for them, so they will now be in S6 prior to the holidays. So I think there's some wider community things and societal things for us all to think of as citizens of Aberdeen, and we will continue to put that support in place within education and within the remits of the committee. Is that?
Thank you very much. Last questions from Councillor Blake, and then we'll move to determination.
Thank you, convener. So my question was, obviously in previous surveys, we have seen poorer mental health amongst the groups who prefer not to say or did not disclose. That didn't come out as strongly to me this time in the report, and I was just wondering, is that an area we have seen some improvement?
Powell?
Through you, convener. Thank you, Councillor Blake. We have seen some improvements. I think overall, I would say probably not as much as we would like, but there have been some, for example, low happiness in relation to life as a whole and school reduced by 5 percentage points in terms of reporting of low happiness for that area. So that's positive. It's not still necessarily where we would like it to be, but we are seeing, I think, things moving in the right direction, but not at the, we would of course like a much sort of stronger pace than that. I think it's a difficult group to support because we don't know why they're, that we don't know why they're answering those things. We can only assume kind of causation. We can't actually, we don't have evidence it's because of this. There could be other multiple factors there, but we're conscious that their mental health outcomes are probably not where we want them to be, and so that support continues again in terms of secondary schools using their own data to see what needs to be put in place within their setting, because they know their pupils, and what support do they need from outside agencies in relation to that. I guess we'll continue for those groups, and we continue to kind of analyse the data for that. But because it's anonymous, we can't go in and dig a bit deeper with those children and young people in relation to that. And it might be that within the secondary reports, they might know their own pupils and be able to identify mostly who those pupils are and do that work. But obviously at this top scale, we wouldn't be able to do that. And that's right. They have the right to anonymity.
Thank you very much. The recommendations, are we content with the recommendations? Everybody, no problems with that. That's great. Thank you. 10.5 is approved. Going on to 10.6. ASN review of spaces. Any questions on this one? We do have 2 amendments here, but if there's any questions first of all? Yeah, Dr. Murray.
Yes, thank you. I suppose my first is more of a comment than a question, and that is, I think it was briefly acknowledged later on in the report, but the spaces for additional support needs is all the school. The whole school is for additional support needs, as I'm sure Eleanor is nodding along. And I think we need to always bear that in mind. It's the whole school is where additional support needs children and teenagers operate. As we've discussed earlier, I think it was disappointing that we don't highlight schools, and I think it's something we do need to consider is the disparity of facilities between schools. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there for a moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. I think those were comments rather than a question.
Yeah, I really like that. Sorry.
Okay, Councillor Grant.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just I guess following on from that, can I ask why can't we decipher? Let's frame it in the form of a question and see if we can get into that a little bit.
Maybe can the director or Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Convener. Sorry, Councillor Grant, was the question why were we not able to name schools?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. So I think, as I've made clear in the report, the estate is so diverse. We've got so many different types of buildings, and also worth bearing in mind within those schools we have so many different types. That's not the word. A diverse range of pupils within the schools and a diverse range of needs for those pupils. Very difficult then to come up with a one-size-fits-all, if you like, in terms of what kinds of provision is needed to meet those needs and which suit the building and in terms of what we're able to achieve within the buildings that we have. So that's really why we went in the direction of saying, you know, the recommendation being for an instruction for officers to continue working with schools on an individual basis so that we can work with individual head teachers to look at the particular demands and challenges with their buildings and the particular needs of pupils within them at any one time.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Grant, yeah.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, thanks for the answer. I'm under no illusion that I am the most informed on this particular matter, and I take what Mr. Jones says seriously. I appreciate this is probably not all that straightforward, and perhaps not as straightforward as a politician like me would just hope and expect that it should be. But is there any greater degree of specificity that could be included in a report like this? Because it's important that as a committee we're able to make decisions with as much information as possible, and in particular where, as the report highlights, good examples of where things are happening in different locations, in different schools, each with different qualities of settings in terms of the kind of quality of the building and the space and these kind of things. I think it is important that if what Mr. Jones intimates is correct, and it is just ultimately too difficult to try and grapple with that beast, that we have as much information as we practically can in order to inform the work that we're doing in relation to ESN support.
Yes, Director.
Do you, Convener? I wish I could give you a simple, easy answer, and I can't. And you know, I'm going to illustrate it and go back in time a little bit when I was at Mile End. Obviously, school built for children with really very complex needs. I remember a medical professional telling me I had to build walls there and there because the environment didn't suit one of the children within the ASM provision. I then remember speaking to another medical professional who said, no building will ever be all things to all children. And I think that's very, very true. So that's one bit. There isn't a almost nirvana state that we can say that's it, because there'll always be a child who it doesn't work well for. And having said that, we do need the flexibility quite often to have a space that can be used flexibly. And it may be that a youngster is doing really well within the classroom environment with some additional support, and then suddenly something changes and they actually need a little bit more flexibility. So I think there wouldn't be a single person in school that wouldn't agree that it's helpful to have a level of flexibility. I guess the other bit I would just, restate from an earlier report, the addition of over 3,000 children has reduced our flexibility. There is no doubt, when actually lots of head teachers have been speaking to Mr. Jones about, can we turn a library into a classroom? Can we turn this? So there has been an impact. The other bit to be mindful of is that we've had that steady rise in pupil population since 2021. That is tailing off now. It looks to be levelling out, and I would anticipate the next step would be that will start to drop. But I won't be able to check that probably until early September. That bit of extra flexibility would be really, really helpful. You'll appreciate that actually any child who is in the city who wants to go to school, we've got the parents and carers want them to attend, we've got that legal duty to do that. So there is no doubt that that has limited some of our flexibility.
Councillor Grant, yeah, come back.
Thanks for that, and I appreciate the openness in the response. Without naming schools at this point, I'm not interested in that. But if I can ask, from the assessment that's been carried out and the details that we've got within the report around the review of spaces for ASN, are there settings within the city, which of course there will be in the context of a brand new school like Riverbank, for example, which is a phenomenal facility, and there's been a lot of care and time went into that, as I'm sure with other new builds, but settings within the city that are night compared to day, that we have, that we have to be aware of. I don't know what that looks like or if there are, but I just want to ask that question first of all.
Yeah, Director.
Through you, convener. So you could essentially put our schools in different groups by age. And that would give you some indication on how they're being utilised. I could go to every single school and they would describe to me the flexible spaces that they currently have at their disposal. Would the extent of flexibility afforded by those spaces be equal? No. Because actually in some cases it might be a repurposed office, in some cases it might be a full classroom, in some cases that the location would not be ideal. So as Mr. Jones says in his report, folk do their very, very best with what they have. When that's proven to be really, really difficult, they have Mr. Jones on speed dial, and his team are exceptionally good at working with. But I'm not going to claim we're in an ideal place because of the pressure. You'll be aware from previous school estate reports, we're over capacity in some places. That does limit flexibility, but you'll equally appreciate, as good as Mr. Jones is, he couldn't get out there and build us 3-4 additional schools to cope with the additional pupil. So we're doing the very, very best that we can with what we have.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That touches on nicely to the next question in relation to the school estate. So where, if anywhere, there are settings within which, I'm not going to say substandard, but are in need of improvement to go towards meeting the needs of pupils with additional support needs, are we confident that the school estates plan picks up all of that? Or are there any gaps, or is there a risk that we've missed something from within the school estates plan that relates to a setting where there's capacity issues, or it's a Victorian building or a building that's not convivial, that's old, that could be sitting not being given the attention it maybe needs in the context of this report?
Thank you, Mr.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Through you, convener, in the broadest sense, if our school estate plan is tailored around pupil numbers and that those predictions are accurate, we should be okay. The challenge, as you know, is that that's been really difficult over the last wee while because we've not been able to always predict the demand. There are some benefits in older buildings, if I'm being honest. There are a number of maybe smaller, what feel a wee bit more kind of protected spaces, but there are also some negatives in terms of you're probably not going to have the flexibility that some of that Riverbank, for example, does have. So I think pupil role, that bit's really important to look at because that's where the inflexibility can come from. But I don't know if Miss Milne or Mr. Jones, you want to add, Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Kavina. Just to add to what Mr. Shepherd has said there, I guess over and above what information we provide through the school estate plan, which obviously looks at issues in the longer term in terms of where we see that there are going to be capacity issues in a school, for example, in the next 2, 3, 4 years. We're also working, on a much sort of shorter timescale with head teachers on an almost daily basis, really, where, as I mentioned earlier, pupils' needs change on quite a dynamic, in quite a dynamic way, and so in the short term we may well be needing to go in and make sort of fairly minor changes to a school, but just to make sure that the needs of a particular child are being met. So we wouldn't necessarily wait until the next annual update of a school estate plan, for example, to do that. We're working on an operational basis all of the time, just to make sure that those needs are being met, just to give some assurance on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Convener, I might have a question in relation to when we get to that point around motion amendment and things, if that's okay.
Okay, I'll come back to you. I think Councillor Blake was next.
Thank you, convener. I guess what my question is, and it's been really helpful, the conversation here, was in relation to essentially, I guess, around 3.15. So essentially, we're creating enhanced spaces for ASN when we have spare capacity. And it's almost like a hierarchy. So the hierarchy of needs, but it's that in here, the hierarchy of statutory obligation. So essentially what's happening, what we're suggesting here is that when we don't have space because the role has increased, and we have a statutory obligation to teach those pupils, we are then providing less service. We're repurposing spaces that we are using that we currently may be using for our ASN pupils to meet that need. So essentially, we're saying that statutory obligation is of a higher level than the legislative obligations around ASN provision.
Okay, thank you, Director.
I disagree. You'll not be surprised. I disagree. As I said, actually, sometimes the space you could say is not as ideal as you might want it to be. But if a youngster needs a protected space, there will be a protected space. It may not be exactly what you might want, but there will be time invested by both education team and corporate landlord in terms of doing the best that we can with the spaces that are available. So we work with what we have. And because generally, if you have a classroom environment, you've actually got a number of youngsters benefiting from that physical space, for example. So it may be that there are a series of quieter breakout spaces, particularly in an older building, for example, spread out across the school. That's where it's really hard, one size fits all, because it depends on the internal kind of map of the school.
Okay. Okay with that, Councillor Blake. Dr. Murray.
Just a quick measure. I was just as an issue of transparency, my son had additional time and additional space for an exam, so he had 5-hour exams in a school office going until 6:30 in the evening. Do you always have adequate spaces for children who need additional examination arrangements in all the secondary schools?
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shepherd or Ms. Milne. Mr. Jones.
Thank you for the question. As far as I understand it, we do have enough space for additional assessment arrangements, but it is getting tighter over the years, given the numbers changing.
Okay, thanks for that. There are two amendments for this report. With a goodwill, it's possible to merge them. Councillor Blake and I have spoken about that. And I think we're almost there. Are we there?
Oh, you've got it in front of you. Yes, to see that, just to make sure, because obviously we've had conversations about what might come back in two different bites of the, back in September and then later in the year. So if that's incorporated, then that would be good to see. Thank you.
On this, Councillor Grant, was this a time for your question? Or
If
or
I
the-
could see the wording. and
okay,
then
yeah,
I
yeah,
might
okay.
have-
Okay.
So if I can
Yeah,
ask,
Councillor
convener,
Grant,
yeah.
yeah.
So for the benefit of anyone else online, I think that there's been discussion earlier on, just pre the committee, and then at a break during the committee around the timescale. So there was an amendment from Councillor Blake who'd asked for something back within 3 cycles. And if Ms Shepherd could just explain why that, from her
Yeah.
perspective, might be challenging, that the merged form of words asks for something to come back as soon as possible, what that likely means, and if there's an interim opportunity to.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms Shepherd.
Through you, convener, I'll try. So it's not an easy question to ask of our schools, and what we're going to have to do in the first instance is go out to our schools. So first period is going to have to be spent kind of designing a survey that can give us some fairly reliable information. What I'm proposing to do is think carefully about the questions, share the results of that survey with you by way of a service update to give you an indication of how things are in, for example, end of September. What we would then do is survey again later in the year, because we know that things can change on a daily basis, and actually come back with some more detailed, more detailed interpretation of what that means later in the year. I'm presuming that committee absolutely will want it prior to the school estate plan next September 26, and we'll absolutely make sure you have got that. I am just so conscious that Mr. Jones will be kept very busy, I'm sure, through the school estate plan in September. And if we commit to bringing something back before then, we'll have to be really, really careful about what we're proposing to do around the school estate plan in September, or there's a risk that we just try and overcommit ourselves. So if that would work, more than happy to take that.
Okay, Councillor Grant.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for that. I think that you'll have sensed that what we don't want is, respecting what you've just said, this to be kicked into the long grass. It is obviously very important in terms of a number of annual pieces of work that come through, and it is important that we approach it in a kind of open way. Dr. Murray's asked some questions as well in relation to that. It would be good to know if Dr. Murray was satisfied as well before we decided if we were going to go with a merged form of words or divide on the motion or amendment.
So Eleanor knows me, I'm really satisfied. Pragmatically, yes, it sounds a good way, but yes, to have a service update in September, find out a bit more where we are, and then have an update in preparation for the next estate plan in 26 sounds.
Good. So if you could circulate that, yes, please. So we've got So the merged amendment will come round. Okay, or on the screen or something, yeah. Okay. So has everybody seen that merged amendment? Everybody's seen it?
Yes, sorry, convener, just for the sake of completeness, is it possible to add in that a service update will be provided by the end of September?
No, I think we've already come to an agreement. I think we've got the undertaking, so that's going to happen, and that will obviously be minuted, and
Yeah.
so it's going to happen. Yeah, we don't think we need to change it. So it'll be included. It's going to happen.
Okay, fine, okay, thank you, fine.
Okay, we all agreed. Good, thank you. Let's move on. Let's move on to 10.7. Questions on Bucksburn Dice Secondary School provision. No questions. Dr. Murray.
Yeah, a quick one. What sort of timescale are we sort of talking about for this happening over?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. There isn't a timescale attached to this at the moment. It would be very much dependent on how conversations were to go with Aberdeenshire colleagues and how any changes would fit in with their requirements, their capacity in schools, etc. So I don't have a particular timescale in mind. I think we'd be able to give you a more of an update on that when we come back following conversations with Aberdeenshire colleagues.
Dr. Murray.
Sorry, could I just say, is there period within which it won't occur? Just to
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. We'd obviously need to build in the time to have that conversation with Aberdeenshire colleagues, and then if the committee was minded to proceed with the proposals, we would then need to undertake a statutory public consultation, as would Aberdeenshire. So that would take, it would normally take 6 to 9 months at the minimum to do a consultation. So certainly not within the next year, but beyond that, I can't really say until we've had those conversations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blake.
Thank you, convener. I've got a number of different questions. I guess my first question really is, obviously when this is a preferred option, but we're noting rather than agreeing. So will the outline business case come back here afterwards, or is this the only time we will see the outline business case? And will the full business case, when it eventually is done, come to education, or will that just be going to finance and resources?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones, on the process.
Thank you, convener. I think that would very much depend on what happens next in terms of the decisions that the committee makes. An outline business case would normally be used for a project which includes capital works, which is why we've done it this way at this time, because one of the options would involve capital works. So if those capital works were to proceed, then we would be looking at bringing back a full business case. However, if the decision of the committee is to proceed with rezoning, which wouldn't necessarily require any capital works, I wouldn't see the need for us to continue with the business case in this form. We'd instead be coming back with a committee report, proposals for consultation, and then it would be the consultation process that takes over from there, really, in terms of how we report that.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Blake.
Okay, but we're being asked to note, not to agree at this stage.
So, Mr. Jones, the significance of noting.
Thank you, convener. Really because to progress with the proposals that are in the business case, we need to have those conversations with Aberdeenshire colleagues. So at the moment, it's not felt that the committee can make a firm decision other than to instruct officers to have those conversations. We would then come back in 2 cycles with an update on those conversations and some more firm proposals and recommendations for committee to consider.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blake.
Thank you, convener. Can I ask about, obviously we have a confidential report and I will try to avoid straying into anything which forms part of that. But I just wanted to check. So the name of the primary school whose prospective rezoning it's not named in this report. So are we treating that information of which primary school within the city may be rezoned as confidential? Or can it be named?
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. The purpose of this report is really to recommend that officers instructed to have a conversation with Aberdeenshire about Dice Academy's catchment area. That's all we're proposing at this stage. What happens beyond that would very much depend on those conversations and subsequent decisions from committee. So I'm not sure it would be helpful at this stage to mention schools which may or may not have catchment areas change in the future.
Okay, thank you. We have the option of going into private to deal with the confidential report if that's desired. But I mean, but in the meantime, we'll just continue with 10.7 with the public report. We can very easily go into confidence.
I do have questions on both papers, but I'm happy to start by being not in private. I do have a couple of questions on the other.
Let's speak with the public. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess what would be interesting to know is has there been any preliminary discussion with Aberdeenshire Council in advance of this?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. There has been very preliminary discussion in that we've paid the courtesy to Aberdeenshire colleagues to let them know that this report would be coming to committee today, and a copy of the report was shared with them. But beyond that, it was felt that we should get the instruction from yourselves from committee first before entering into any more detailed or formal conversation with them.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Blake.
Okay, the paper doesn't mention the music school. Will there be any impact on the music school around this, and how many pupils? What's the spread between city and shire at the music school?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, convener. The content of the paper really refers to the catchment area for Dice Academy. The music school, it sits separately with that. From that, in that those attending the music school come from all parts of the city and beyond. So I would not anticipate any impact directly on the music school.
Okay, Councillor Blake.
Thank you. So in the feasibility study, there was obviously a number of areas that were picked out as areas of improvement for Dice Academy. There was general accessibility for those with mobility difficulties, the lack of pupil social spaces, the heating and ventilation and practical teaching areas, the requirement for separate assembly and sports hall. Obviously, it's rated condition B as building as well, just to say that. I guess my question is obviously that we're not looking to address these issues in our recommendations. That's not what is there any other plans in place to address some of those issues that you have highlighted in the feasibility study?
Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Convener. One of the options, obviously, within the business case would address those issues if the capital works were to go ahead. However, we're very mindful of the pressure on the council's capital programme and the fact that there is no budget identified for this particular piece of work within the capital programme. So the alternative option being put forwards as a recommendation is one which would not put additional pressure on the capital programme. The kinds of improvements that have been listed through the feasibility study for Dice Academy would be the kinds of improvements we would see if we were to do a feasibility study on many other schools across the city. Ideally, we would like to be able to carry out those improvements to all of our buildings, but financial constraints mean that we're not able to do that with all of our buildings at present. So we need to look at other options, and we have looked at other options for dealing with the capacity issues at Bucksburn Academy and Dice Academy.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Malik?
Thank you very much, Convener. Are there specific risks identified, such as demographic uncertainty and parents and guardian concern rezoning?
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Convener. We've certainly undertaken an initial impact assessment, and some of those issues have been identified. It's, officers do understand that talk of changes to catchment areas, changes to schools will cause some anxiety for pupils and their families. At the moment, we're at the very early stages of these proposals, in that we're only proposing a conversation with Aberdeenshire colleagues. If things were to progress, as I mentioned earlier, we would then progress to a full public consultation where stakeholders would have an opportunity to give us more information about potential impact on themselves as a result of these changes, which we would, of course, report back to committee before any decision is taken.
Thank you. Councillor Malik?
Thanks very much, Convener. Thanks very much, Mr. Jones, for the clarification. However, earlier on, we didn't get a time scale. But I move on. And how will the council manage interim risk, for example, continuing overcapacity or ongoing at Dice Academy?
Okay, Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Convener. At present, there isn't any particular concern about the capacity at Dice Academy. This report is really intended to address the issues with Bucksburn Academy's capacity issues. If we were to make changes to Dice, that would free up some space to allow us to adjust and rebalance numbers across the two schools. In the meantime, with the numbers at Bucksburn Academy, committee will be aware that we have some temporary classrooms in place at Bucksburn, which is helping to meet the capacity needs at the school prior to a permanent extension being built.
Councillor Malik?
Thank you very much, Convener. And what about integrated impact assessment? Maybe this question can be answered by legal. And integrated impact assessment, I believe, not carried out. So would it be a legal challenge for the Aberdeen City Council?
Any thoughts from the legal team?
Yep. No decisions have been made at this particular point in time as to any particular proposal going forward. There would ultimately have to be an IIA. Councillor Malik, you're quite correct.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Jones is going to come in.
Thank you, Convener. Just to clarify, we have undertaken an initial impact assessment, which has identified some of those issues in terms of causing anxiety for stakeholders and so on. The intention, though, would be to update that impact assessment once any public consultation is carried out, where we'd have a lot more data to help us actually, really add meat to the bones, if you like, in terms of that impact assessment.
Thank you. Councillor Malik?
Thanks very much. So initial integrated impact assessment did carry out, but not attached with the report.
Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Convener. I'm not totally up to speed with the process, but I do understand that the impact assessments have been published on the website. I don't think they would normally be attached to the report, but I don't know if the clerk can help us with that.
Do we have clarity on that? Just checking.
Yes, thank you, convener. Yes, and we don't usually attach them, but there is a link on the front of the agenda to the impact assessments on the website, and the equalities team upload those when they're provided.
Thank you very much. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, convener. I just following on for something that Councillor Big mentioned about the music school. The music school's something that I know a great deal about because I helped to set it up. Mr. Jones answered in terms of the numbers at the music school, but I'm assuming that there won't be any change to the physical part of the music school, which is almost a separate wing of Dice Academy.
Thank you, convener. That's right, Councillor MacLeod. I'm not anticipating any changes physically to the building.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, it goes back to Councillor Blake's first question. So beyond if the committee were to agree the recommendations, which includes making recommendations to the Finance and Resources Committee, a report will come back that allows the committee, for any reason, following engagement with, as Mr. Jones says, that needs to happen with Aberdeenshire, that the committee wants to change its mind on, quote, noting a preferred option. So we're not saying that any preferred option at this stage is something that the committee supports. Is that correct?
Okay, thank you.
It is really essentially what we're saying, the officers have a preferred option, but that's not yet something the Education and Children's Services Committee has approved.
Okay, Director.
Do you, convener? Absolutely. Essentially giving us permission to go and have those conversations, given the exploratory work that we've been doing.
Okay, thank you. We can now go to determination. Can go to the determination now. We've got an amendment from Councillor Blake. I'm going to be moving the recommendations, seconded by the Vice Convener. Yeah. Do you want
To do the, before you do the determination, whether we could have the question in the private session. I just had one or two things.
Okay,
in the session I just wanted to ask.
Let's do that.
If that's okay, we can do it the other way around, but I thought that might be helpful.
Okay, let's go into the private session for the, I think it's 11.1